the alien princess entered his mind and found out he was her silent guardian. The distress beacon hit my console at 3:47, and I was already moving before I finished reading it. 3 years of quiet work, 3 years of watching coordinates and running cargo routes that nobody else wanted, and the one moment I had been quietly dreading had arrived in the worst possible way. A Royal Telhari vessel, designation Crimson Lace, was venting atmosphere somewhere in the dead corridor between sectors 9 and 11. That corridor had no patrol ships, no relay stations, and no traffic except mine. My name is Calvin Marsh. I haul freight on a ship called the Better Days, which is a name I chose on purpose because the days before it were not good. I am 34 years old, I have a scar that runs from my left ear to my jaw, and I own exactly one good jacket. By every measure the Galactic Consortium uses to rank species worth, I am the definition of unremarkable. Human, male, cargo class, no telepathic ability, no noble lineage, no political connections. I was perfectly fine with all of that. It kept people from looking too closely. I punched in the intercept vector and let the Better Days run hard. The engines groaned at the acceleration, but they held. They always held. I had rebuilt them myself, piece by piece, over 4 years, and I knew every sound they made the way a person knows their own heartbeat. The distress signal carried a royal encryption tag. That meant whoever was on that ship was someone the Telhari considered important. The Telhari considered very few people important. They were a tall, pale-skinned species with eyes the color of deep water and a collective cultural certainty that they sat at the top of every hierarchy that mattered. They had mind-reading abilities they called the deep touch, and they used those abilities the way some people used a firm handshake, constantly, confidently, and without asking permission. They had decided, based on studies I found laughably incomplete, that humans were cognitively shallow, surface thinkers, good for manual labor and not much else. I had read those studies. I had found 14 methodological errors across 6 of them. I had never told anyone. The Crimson Lace came into visual range and my stomach tightened. The damage was serious. A lateral hull breach along the midsection, a secondary rupture near the engine coupling, and from the energy readings I was pulling, no more than 40 minutes of life support remaining on internal reserves. There were 11 life signs aboard. One of them had a biosignature profile I recognized immediately because I had memorized it. Princess Salith of the Telhari royal line, 3rd in succession, lead diplomat for the Galactic Consortium's Eastern expansion talks, and the subject of 3 confirmed elimination plots in the past 30 months, all of which had quietly fallen apart before they reached execution phase. I was the reason they fell apart. She did not know that. I matched velocity with the crippled vessel, extended the docking collar, and waited for the magnetic seal to catch. It did, with a heavy clunk that traveled through the hull of the Better Days like a slow drumbeat. Then I went to the airlock, popped the hatch, and came face to face with 4 Telhari royal guards in full armor, each one of them a head taller than me, and radiating the kind of hostility that aristocratic species tend to deploy when they feel endangered and don't want to admit it. Behind them, standing in the corridor of her damaged ship with her hands folded in front of her, was Salith. I had seen her in broadcasts. Broadcasts did not do her justice, but not in the way people usually mean when they say that. She was striking in the way that a storm front is striking, precise, composed, and carrying the clear suggestion that she could become very dangerous very quickly. Her hair was the silver white that all highborn Telhari shared, pulled back in a style that probably had a formal name I didn't know. Her eyes were the color of ocean water in deep winter. She looked at me. I looked at her. One of the guards stepped forward and began reciting a formal greeting protocol that was going to take approximately 4 minutes if I let it run its full length. I held up a hand. "Your ship is dying," I said. "You can finish that later, come aboard." The guard stopped. His expression shifted through about 6 different emotions in 2 seconds. I turned and walked back into my ship, because the docking seal was not going to hold indefinitely, and we did not have time for ceremony. For a moment there was silence behind me. Then I heard footsteps. They came aboard, all 11 of them, filing into the cargo bay of the Better Days with the careful movements of people who found their surroundings deeply offensive, but had no alternative. The guards took up positions at the corners of the bay, hands on their weapons, eyes scanning everything. 2 of Salith's personal attendants pressed close to her side. The rest of the crew found places to stand, and did a collective, silent job of pretending my ship was not exactly as worn as it looked. I sealed the airlock, disengaged the docking collar, and gave the crimson lace enough of a push to clear the debris field it had drifted into. Then I set a course for the nearest consortium way station, 6 hours out, and engaged the autopilot. I went to the small galley at the back of the bridge corridor, heated 2 meal packets, poured 2 cups of ship coffee, and carried one of them back to where Salith was standing. She looked at the cup like I had handed her a live animal. "It's not good coffee," I told her honestly, "but it's hot, and hot matters on a cold ship." The Better Days ran cold. It always had. I had patched the insulation twice and the problem persisted. She did not take the cup immediately. She studied me instead, the way the Telhari do when they are forming an assessment. I had seen that look directed at humans before. It usually ended with a kind of refined dismissal, the look you give a piece of furniture that is functional but not beautiful. I set the cup on the nearest flat surface and went back to the bridge. I could feel her watching me. That was fine. I had been watched before. I settled into the pilot's chair, pulled up the navigation display, and began running a check on the way station's docking availability. Behind me, I heard the soft sound of boots on the metal floor. Then, quietly, the sound of a cup being picked up. I did not turn around. I did not smile. I simply continued what I was doing. 43 minutes into the journey, I felt it. The Telhari have a way of initiating the deep touch that most humans describe as a sudden pressure behind the eyes, like the first second of a headache that never develops further. I had read about it extensively. I had never experienced it directly because, as everyone knew, humans could not survive a full Telhari mind scan. The few who had undergone it by force had emerged with significant cognitive damage. It was one of the reasons the consortium had prohibited the practice across species lines, without consent. She did it anyway. I think she expected to confirm something she already believed. I think she intended it as a quick surface check, a glance into what she assumed was a simple, uncomplicated mind, just enough to confirm I had no hostile intentions and could be classified and set aside. I felt the touch reach the edge of my thoughts, and I made a choice. I let her in. Not because I had no option, not because I couldn't resist. I had read 3 separate studies on Telhari neural interface protocols, and I understood the mechanics well enough to know that resistance was possible. I let her in because I had been carrying a very heavy thing for a very long time, and I was tired, and some part of me that I normally kept very quiet thought, let her see. Let her actually see. The pressure behind my eyes deepened. Then it stopped being pressure and became something else entirely. I heard, very faintly, through the wall that separated the bridge from the corridor, the sound of Princess Salith drawing a sharp breath. I kept my eyes on the navigation display. The way station was 5 hours and 41 minutes away. The Better Days ran steady. Outside, the stars held their positions like they always did. I reached for my coffee cup and took a slow sip. Behind me, I heard the sound of something that might have been a person trying to find solid footing and not quite managing it. I did not turn around. I simply waited the way I had learned to wait, the way I had been waiting for 3 years, patient and quiet and certain that whatever came next, I could handle it. I always could. That was the thing about being human. We always could. She did not move for a long time. I know this because I was watching the reflection in my navigation screen, the faint ghost image of the corridor behind me, where Salith stood perfectly still with one hand pressed flat against the wall and her cup of ship coffee hanging forgotten at her side. Her attendants had noticed something was wrong. They were exchanging looks, the kind that ask a question without saying a word. The guards had shifted their stances, a half-step forward, alert to a threat they couldn't identify. I kept my hands on the console. I kept my breathing even. I let the better days carry us through the dark at a steady 600 kilometers per second, and I waited. When the Telhari do a deep touch, they do not describe it as reading a mind. Their word for it translates closer to walking through a space. Your thoughts are the furniture, the walls, the floor beneath their feet. A shallow mind, by their definition, is a small room with very little in it. A few instincts, some surface wants, maybe a handful of clear memories, all of it easily mapped in seconds. That was what they believed about humans. They had the studies to prove it. Small rooms, dim lights, not much to see. I had been inside my own mind my entire life. I knew what was actually in there. I had simply never had a reason to show anyone. When Salith touched the edge of my thoughts and I let the door open, what she found was not a small room. I know this because she told me later on a different day, in a formal report she submitted to the Consortium Council, which I read once and then filed in a folder I keep encrypted and rarely open. She described it as walking through a doorway expecting a closet and finding a building. Multiple floors, long corridors. Rooms branching off rooms, each one organized, each one occupied, each one connected to the others by a logic she said she had to spend several seconds simply understanding before she could move. The first thing she found was the engineering section. I have always thought in systems, in parts and how they fit, in the cause and effect chain that runs from problem to solution. She moved through it quickly, recognizing the pattern even if the specific language of it was unfamiliar. Human engineering thought, she would later write, is extraordinarily dense. It does not merely solve problems. It anticipates them, catalogs them, prepares responses for scenarios that have not yet occurred. Then she went deeper because she couldn't stop herself. She found the language rooms. I speak 4 languages fluently and read 2 more at a working level. None of them are Telhari. She found my working notes on the Telhari Diplomatic Codex, which I had spent 14 months translating from secondary sources because no official human translation existed. She found the marginalia I had written in the gaps, small notations where the diplomatic language used softened phrasing to obscure a harder meaning, places where a polite word in the formal register meant something very different in the cultural context it came from. She stopped there for a moment. I could feel it, a kind of stillness in the touch, the way a person goes still when they find something they did not expect. Then she went further. She found the political files. 3 years of them. Telhari noble house movements, shipping pattern analyses, meeting record cross-references, second and third-order connection maps between names and dates and locations. I had built it the way you build anything that has to hold weight, carefully, piece by piece, from the ground up, testing each connection before adding the next. She found the report I had filed 18 months ago under a false species registration, a consortium security tip that had redirected a scheduled diplomatic convoy away from a route I had identified as compromised. The convoy had carried a junior Telhari minister and 12 staff members who were not aware that the alternate route I had quietly suggested through an intermediary had also carried Princess Salith, traveling under a reduced security profile for a private engagement in Sector 4. She had been on that convoy. She had not known she was on a compromised route. She had not known anyone had noticed. I had noticed. She found the second file, 8 months ago, a conference on the Velith station where 3 separate intelligence threads I had been tracking had converged on a single conclusion. Someone intended to use the conference as cover. I had spent 6 weeks building a counter-profile, and had placed the key piece of information with a consortium investigator I trusted, anonymously, through a routing channel I had set up specifically for situations like that one. The conference had proceeded without incident. The official report listed the disrupted plan as internally discovered. Internally, I had almost smiled at that word when I read it. She found the third file and the fourth, and by the fifth I could feel something changing in the touch. The clinical quality it had started with, that measured, assessing quality of a person cataloging a specimen, it was gone. What replaced it was harder to name. It was something quieter and more unsettled, the feeling of a person who has walked into a room and realized the room has been expecting them. She found the day I first saw her. It was a consortium broadcast, 2 years and 4 months ago, a diplomatic address she had given at the opening of the Eastern expansion talks. I had been eating a very bad meal at a way station in Sector 7, watching the broadcast on a screen above the service counter, and she had been speaking about the future of interspecies cooperation in language that was formal and polished and carefully political. I remembered thinking, she actually means it. Not the formal words, the thing underneath the formal words. I had spent enough time reading Telhari diplomatic language to hear the difference between a speech given because protocol required one and a speech given because the speaker believed in what they were saying. She believed in what she was saying. In a council chamber full of species representatives all calculating their own advantage, there was one person on that screen who was actually trying. The thought that followed was not dramatic. It was not a decision made in a moment of inspiration. It was quieter than that, the kind of thought that arrives fully formed and immediately starts organizing itself into action. Someone should make sure she lives long enough to do the thing she's trying to do. And then, as naturally as a breath, the thought that followed it, looks like that's me. She found that memory and I felt her go completely still. Not the stillness of shock, something more complex. The stillness of a person who has been handed a piece of information and needs a moment to understand what it changes. What it changed was everything. In my corridor, on the other side of the thin wall from where I sat watching star charts, I heard a sound I had not expected. It was not a gasp and it was not quite a word. It was something between them, something small and involuntary, the sound a person makes when they have been carrying a belief so long they forgot they were holding it, and then it is removed from their hands without warning. I heard her attendants move. I heard one of them say her name, low and careful. I heard Salith tell them, in a voice that was remarkably steady, to give her a moment. Then I heard footsteps. The door to the bridge slid open. She did not ask permission to enter, and I did not require it. I was already turning my chair when she came in, and I watched her cross the small space and stop at the edge of my console, close enough that I could see the very slight tremor in her hands that she was working to control. She looked at me for a long time. I looked back. "You were at the Velith Station conference," she said. It was not a question. "No," I said. "I was in Sector 12. That's why it had to go through an intermediary." She processed that. I watched her work through it, the distance, the indirection, the deliberate removal of myself from any chain of events that might lead back to a name. "The convoy reroute," she said. I was closer for that one, still not close enough to do it directly. She looked down at the console between us. On the navigation screen, the way station marker pulsed slowly at the edge of the display. "Why?" she asked. The word came out clean and undecorated, stripped of all the formal register she normally operated in, and that alone told me how far off her footing she actually was. This was not the question of a princess addressing a human cargo hauler. This was the question of a person who has found something in the dark they did not expect and cannot yet explain. I had thought about how I would answer this question if it ever came. I had thought about it more than once. On long runs through empty corridors, in the quiet hours between one-way station and the next. I had considered careful answers and thorough answers and answers that explained the logic step by step. I gave her the only true one. Because someone should, I said, and I was there and I could. She stared at me. I reached past her carefully, picked up my coffee cup from the console edge and took a sip. It had gone cold. I drank it anyway. "That's all," she said. "That's all." She was silent for a moment that stretched long enough to feel like its own separate thing, a pocket of time with weight and texture. "You're not what they told me humans were," she said finally. I set the cup down. "The studies have some errors in them," I said. "If you want, I can walk you through the methodology problems. I have notes." She looked at me. And for the first time since she had come aboard my ship, Princess Salith of the Telhari royal line looked at me the way one person looks at another person. Not upward, not downward, directly across. "Yes," she said quietly, "I think I would like that." Outside, the stars moved slowly past. The better days ran steady and cold through the dark between worlds, carrying its cargo and its unexpected passengers toward a way station that did not yet know what was coming. And I started from the first error in the first study, and I talked, and she listened, and somewhere in the quiet space between words, 3 years of invisible work began to come into the light. Her guards were furious. The one who spoke for them was named something I couldn't quite pronounce, so in my head I had been calling him Lead, because he was always the first one forward and the last one to settle. He had the rigid posture of someone trained from childhood to believe that personal dignity was a military operation requiring constant vigilance. He did not come to me directly. He went to Salith first. I heard the conversation through the bridge door because the Better Days is not a large ship and the walls are not thick, and also because Lead did not particularly moderate his volume. He told her that what I had done was an illegal act, that unauthorized deep touch access across species lines was prohibited, that whatever I claimed to have done for her in the past was likely fabricated, that a human with access to Telhari political intelligence was a security threat, not a guardian, that she should be concerned, not, he paused, searching for the right word and landed on, not curious. I found a supply manifest that needed organizing and organized it while I listened. Salith let him finish. Then she told him, in the same measured, formal voice I had heard her use in that broadcast 2 years ago, that the access had not been unauthorized because she had felt me allow it, that she was aware of the legal status and was nodding his concern, and that she would speak with the human herself. Lead was not satisfied. I could tell by the quality of the silence that followed. She came back to the bridge and sat in the navigator's seat, which nobody used, and looked at me with the expression of a person who has decided to understand something completely and is not planning to stop until they do. "They think you're dangerous," she said. "I know. Are you?" I thought about that honestly because it deserved an honest answer. To people planning to harm you, yes. To you, no. How would I know which answer is true? "You were in my mind," I said. "You tell me." She was quiet for a moment. "You let me in on purpose." "Yes. Most humans can't survive the deep touch. The consortium has case records going back 40 years. I know, I read them. And you let me in anyway." "I trusted your control," I said, "and I thought it was time for someone to see. I've been carrying it alone for a while." She absorbed that. I watched her turn it over, examining it from different angles. "Your intelligence on the current summit threat," she said, "is it solid?" This was the part I had been moving toward since the moment I heard her distress beacon. I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket and pulled out a data chip. Small, flat, matte gray, built to look completely unremarkable. I set it on the console between us. 6 weeks of work, I said. The threat is organized, it has internal access to the summit venue, and it was supposed to execute in 4 days. I was on my way to deliver that to a consortium security contact when your ship went down. She looked at the chip. She did not pick it up yet. Why not use consortium channels directly? Because 2 of the 4 people I identified as part of the network are consortium officials. Using official channels would have warned them. She looked up at me sharply. Which officials? Their names are on the chip. She reached out and picked it up. She held it carefully, the way you hold something whose weight you're still measuring. Lead came back. This time he came to the bridge door directly, opened it without knocking, and looked at the chip in her hand with an expression that I imagine he considered neutral and was not. "Your Highness," he said, "whatever that is, it should be verified by security before you." "I know what it is," Salith said quietly, "and I know where it came from. Give me a moment." Lead looked at me. I looked back. Neither of us said anything. "A moment," Salith repeated, with a slight additional weight on the second word. Lead left. The door stayed open. Salith turned the chip over in her fingers. "You know what this means," she said, "if what's on here is accurate." "It's accurate." "I'm not doubting that. I'm asking if you understand the position it puts you in. A human with vetted intelligence on a conspiracy against a Telhari royal summit. The consortium will want to know how you got it. They'll want to know everything about you." "I know. 3 years of invisibility ends the moment I use this." I nodded once. She looked at me. "And you're handing it to me anyway." "That was always the plan," I said. "The invisibility was a tool, not a goal. It was useful while it kept the work protected. If using it now gets you through the summit safely, then it's done its job." The silence that followed had a different quality than the ones before it. It was not a thinking silence. It was something more like a person standing at a ledge they hadn't expected to reach quite so soon, looking at the distance they were about to cross. "I entered your mind to dismiss you," she said. "I know. I found something entirely different." "I know that too." She looked at the chip, then at me, then at the stars moving slowly past the bridge window. "How many humans know the things you know?" she asked. "How many are watching the way you watch?" The question was the most important one anyone had ever asked me. I took it seriously. "I don't have a number," I said. "But I'll tell you this. The ones I know, the ones I've crossed paths with, they're not doing what I'm doing. They're doing other versions of it. A doctor on a border station who keeps records of species health crises 3 months before the consortium classifies them. A teacher on a colony ship who has been quietly writing histories that don't get published because the political moment isn't ready for them. A mechanic who keeps every ship she touches running at a standard 2 levels above what the owner pays for because she believes in the thing the ship is doing." I paused. "Humans pay attention," I said. "We are very, very good at noticing things. We are even better at caring about them quietly and for a long time." Salith was looking at me with an expression I did not have a name for. It was not the assessment look. It was not the diplomatic look. It was something more unguarded than either of those. "Your consortium classification," she said slowly. "Cognitively limited, surface thinkers." 14 errors in 6 studies, I said. "I have the full breakdown if you want it." "I want it," she said immediately, then she stopped, "after the summit." "Of course." She stood still holding the chip. At the door she paused without turning around. "The coffee was terrible," she said. "I told you it would be." "You were honest about that at least." "I'm honest about everything," I said. "I'm just not always loud about it." She left the bridge. I heard her calling Lead's name in the corridor, her voice back to its formal register, all business now, the chip in her hand and a plan forming. I turned back to the navigation display. 3 hours and 17 minutes to the way station. I pulled up the summit venue schematics from the secondary files on my console, the ones I had built over 6 weeks and never shown anyone, and I started building the operational picture in my head. There was work to do. There was always work to do. And I had never been any good at walking away from it. The way station was called Hold Point 7, and it was exactly as cheerful as the name suggested. A gray, functional platform at the intersection of 4 shipping corridors, equipped with docking arms, a fuel depot, a medical bay, and a security office staffed by 2 consortium officers who were very surprised to see a Telhari royal party come through their airlock at 9:11 in the morning. Salith handled the officers with the calm efficiency of someone who has spent a lifetime navigating institutions. Within 20 minutes, she had requisitioned a secure communications room, established an encrypted channel to the summit venue, and was speaking to the consortium's head of external security, a tall, dry-voiced man named Garrison, who had the manner of someone who had been dealing with emergencies for so long that they no longer registered as interesting. I sat outside the communications room on a hard bench and read a technical manual I had been working through for 2 months. This was the honest truth. I had been meaning to finish it and kept not having the time. Lead stood against the opposite wall with his arms folded. We had now spent approximately 9 hours in proximity to each other and had not had a conversation that lasted more than 4 seconds. He looked at me. I kept reading. After a while he said, "You knew the data chip would compromise you." I turned a page. "Yes." "You did it anyway." "Yes." He was quiet again. "Then that's irrational." I looked up. Lead was watching me with an expression that had shed some of its professional hostility and replaced it with something that looked a lot like genuine confusion. "Is it?" I said. "Personal exposure with no personal benefit," he said flatly. "By any strategic standard, that's a poor calculation." "By some standards," I agreed. "By others, it's the whole point." He looked at me for a long moment. "What other standards?" I thought about the best way to explain it to someone trained to see every action as a transaction. "When I was 14, I said, "I lived in a colony settlement in Sector 3. Small place, 300 people, about half of them working families and the other half people who had run out of better options. We had 1 doctor. She worked 18 hours some days, and she never billed the families who couldn't pay. And when the heating system failed 2 winters in a row, she slept in the medical bay, so she could stay close to the patients who needed temperature control." Lead was watching me without moving. "Nobody asked her to do any of that," I said. "Nobody paid her for the extra hours. She did it because she was there and the job was there and it needed doing. That's what she had decided her life was for. I watched her do it for 6 years. I went back to the manual. "I decided something similar," I said, "eventually." Lead did not respond for a while. When he did, it was a single word, quiet and stripped of all its usual professional armor. "Why her?" I kept my eyes on the manual. "She's trying to do something real," I said. "In a system full of people playing smaller games, that's worth protecting." The communications room door opened. Salith came out with the chip in her hand, and Garrison's voice still audible through the closing door, already giving orders. She looked at both of us. She read the room in the way that people who are very good at their jobs can read rooms in seconds. "We have 4 days, she said. "Garrison is moving security assets, but the 2 compromised officials are in positions that mean any internal move will be visible. We need an approach from outside the official structure." She looked at me. "I have the venue schematics," I said. "I know," she said. "I saw them in your mind." Lead made a sound that might have been the beginning of an objection. She stopped it with one very quiet look. "We work together," she said, "all 3 of us, and whoever else on my staff has the operational profile for this." She paused. "Your ship, Mr. Marsh. The better days. Can it pass as an official supply run to the summit venue? With the right documentation, I have contacts who can turn that around in about 6 hours. Do it." I was already reaching for my comm unit. The next 4 days ran at the speed that serious work runs, which is to say, constantly, without much sleep, fueled by bad coffee and the specific kind of focus that comes from knowing exactly what happens if you get it wrong. Salith was extraordinary to work with, not in the way that famous people are sometimes surprisingly competent up close, in a deeper way. She absorbed information at a speed that matched mine, which had never happened with anyone before, and she had an instinct for strategic weak points that I had spent years developing, and she seemed to simply carry naturally. We disagreed twice, both times about timing, and both times we worked through it without performance. She told me when she thought I was wrong. I told her when I thought the same. We both turned out to be partly right each time, which is the honest result of most arguments between competent people. Lead turned out to be remarkable in the field. I want to record that because I think it matters. He had spent the entire journey from the wreck to hold point 7 treating me as a threat to be managed, and I had spent the same journey treating him as an obstacle to be patient about, and we had both been operating on exactly the information we had available. In the venue, with a task in front of us that required both of what we brought to it, something between us recalibrated without announcement. He stopped treating me like a threat. I stopped treating him like an obstacle. We started communicating in the shorthand of people who are moving quickly through the same complicated situation and need the other person to keep up. He kept up. On the 4th day, at 1400 hours, the network made its move. They had 3 entry points and a communication structure that was tight and professional. Whoever had planned it knew the summit venue well. They knew the security rotation, the response protocols, and the 2 internal contacts whose positions would create gaps at the right moment. What they did not know was that we had identified all 3 of those elements 6 weeks ago, had quietly closed the gaps the internal contacts were meant to create, and had positioned ourselves at all 3 entry points behind the cover of a supply run that nobody had thought to question, because it was documented, mundane, and operating a ship that nobody considered important. The better days. The name had never felt more appropriate. The contact at Entry 1 made their move and found Lead waiting with 4 of Salith's security staff, all of them appearing from behind cargo containers that a Better Days manifest listed as approved conference catering supplies. Entry 2 was handled by Garrison's people, who by this point had enough information to act without compromising anything, because we had delivered the necessary intelligence through a channel that left no trace back to the compromised officials. Entry 3 was mine. I want to be clear. I'm not trained military. I have some background from a period in my life I don't talk about extensively, and I have kept myself in the kind of shape that long cargo hauling requires, because maintaining your ship and maintaining yourself are not entirely different disciplines. What I have is not combat excellence. It is something more practical. I do not panic, I do not freeze, and I am very good at being in a place before the person I am watching arrives. The contact at Entry 3 came through a service corridor at the rear of the main conference hall. They were good, moving fast and quiet, and they might have reached the target they were aiming for, which was the communications relay that controlled the venue's emergency lockdown system. I was sitting on a maintenance case directly in front of that relay, with a cup of coffee in my hand when they came around the corner. They stopped. I looked up. "This is a restricted area," they said. "I know," I said. "I'm the one who flagged it." 2 consortium security officers came around the corner behind them. It was over in seconds. Everything that had taken 6 weeks and 4 days, and one very unexpected journey aboard a damaged royal vessel, came to its conclusion in a service corridor smelling of recycled air and cleaning solution, under lights that buzzed faintly at a frequency that had been annoying me for 2 hours. I drank my coffee. Salith found me 20 minutes later, still in the corridor, writing up my contact report on a small notepad I kept in my jacket. She came in alone, which told me something about how the next few minutes were intended to go. She looked at the detained contact, now secured by Garrison's people and being moved toward the official processing area. She looked at the relay. She looked at me. "That's the third time," she said. "Same number as before. Before, I didn't know it was you." I finished the sentence I was writing and looked up. She was standing close enough that I didn't have to raise my voice. In the buzzing corridor light, she looked tired in the way that competent people look tired after doing something difficult correctly. It is a different kind of tired than failure produces. "It's done," I said. "Yes," she said, "it is." There was a pause. Outside in the main venue, I could hear the distant sound of the summit continuing. Adjusted in schedule, officials redirected. A small bureaucratic storm of reorganization rippling through the proceedings as Garrison's people managed the aftermath. "They'll write it up," she said. "Anonymous intelligence, internal discovery." "That's fine." "Your name won't appear." "That's also fine." "Is it?" she asked, and there was something in the question that wasn't accusation or confusion. It was something closer to genuine wanting to know. "I didn't do it for my name," I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, with the care of someone choosing words with great deliberateness, "My people have a word. It doesn't translate directly. The closest version in standard is one who carries a weight they were never asked to carry and carries it well." I closed the notepad. "That's a long word." "It's one word in ours." I put the notepad back in my pocket. "How's the summit?" "It will survive," she said. "It will probably do what it was meant to do," a small pause, "because we're still here to see it." I nodded. From the corridor behind her, Lead appeared. He looked at me for a second with an expression that had, over 4 days, traveled a very long distance from where it started. He nodded once, sharp and professional and entirely sincere. I nodded back. "I should get back to the better days," I said. "She's in docking bay 4, and she probably needs attention after the supply run." Salith looked at me for a moment more. The assessment was gone. The diplomatic mask was gone. What was left was simply a person, tired and clear-eyed, looking at another person the same way. "Mr. Marsh," she said. "Marsh is fine," I said. "Marsh," she said, "thank you." I picked up my coffee cup, found it empty, and set it back down. "Someone had to," I said. "I was there, I could." I walked back toward docking bay 4. Behind me, the summit continued. In the main hall, voices were debating the future of interspecies cooperation, and somewhere in the middle of all of it, one person believed in what they were saying and was still standing to say it. That was enough. That had always been enough. 2 weeks later, the report landed on my console while I was running a standard cargo transfer in Sector 6. I almost missed it. It was buried in a consortium news feed I kept running in the background mostly out of habit, and the headline was formal and dry in the way consortium announcements always are. Telhari Royal Delegate proposes formal review of human cognitive classification standards. It was a single paragraph on the public release. I knew the full version was considerably longer because I had been there when parts of it were being written. My name was not in the report. My name was not in the summit incident record or the security assessment or the intelligence filing. I was, officially, not part of any of it. I read the paragraph twice, filed the report in the encrypted folder, and went back to the cargo transfer. The transfer took most of the morning. When it was done, I went to the small galley, made a cup of coffee, and sat at the narrow table with the porthole on my left showing a stretch of deep space that was perfectly ordinary and perfectly beautiful. I had been thinking, in the 2 weeks since the summit, about the question Salith had asked me in the service corridor. "Is it fine that your name won't appear?" I had said yes, and I had meant it, but I had also been thinking about what it actually meant to mean it, because I did not begin this 3 years ago from a position of certainty. I had not always been sure. There had been nights, long ones, running dark corridors between stops that barely covered fuel costs, when the quiet had been very loud and I had wondered whether I was building something or just pretending to. What I had come to over time was not a grand conclusion. It was something simpler. It was the understanding that the work and the recognition are separate things, and that confusing them is where most people go wrong. Recognition is nice. It confirms that the work reached the person it was meant for, but it is not what makes the work worth doing. What makes the work worth doing is simpler than that. It is the moment in the service corridor when Garrison's people come around the corner. It is Leeds' nod, sharp and sincere. It is the sound of Salith's voice in that first broadcast saying words she actually meant, still saying them, still standing, still there to say them. It is the fact of the thing continuing that would have stopped without the work. That is the thing you carry. That is what you carry it for. 3 weeks after the summit, Salith filed the full formal proposal with the Consortium Council. I read it in pieces, the public portions as they were released, and the parts I had seen in draft form when Lead, improbably, had forwarded me a copy with a note that read, "Thought you should see this." He had signed it with his actual name, which I had not known until that moment. His name was Wren. The proposal was thorough. It included the scan data from the deep touch she had performed aboard the Better Days, which had been formatted carefully to protect my identity while still conveying the essential finding, that the existing human cognitive classification was based on methodology that contained significant errors and should be formally reviewed. It included testimony from consortium researchers who had, following Salith's initial contact, begun conducting voluntary scans with human subjects who had agreed to participate. Their findings, preliminary as they were consistent with each other and entirely inconsistent with the standard classification. One researcher described it in terms that I found, privately, very funny. The subjects demonstrate internal architecture of unexpected complexity and organization, accompanied by an emotional processing depth that current models did not predict. The dominant characteristic appears to be a capacity for sustained, voluntary investment in outcomes that offer no direct personal benefit to the subject. This characteristic appears widespread and not anomalous. Sustained, voluntary investment in outcomes that offer no direct personal benefit. They had spent 16 years building a classification framework, and what they had missed was the core of the thing. We care. We decide to care, and then we keep caring, and we are very patient about it, and we do not stop. I thought about the doctor in Sector 3, working her extra hours in the cold medical bay. I thought about the teacher on the colony ship, writing histories for a moment that hadn't come yet. I thought about the mechanic who kept every ship running above standard not because anyone would notice, but because she believed in what the ship was doing. I thought about all the invisible work that the consortium had spent 40 years classifying as primitive instinct, never once considering that what they were looking at was something much more organized and much more deliberate than anything they had built a framework to measure. I finished my coffee. Outside the porthole, the stars held their positions, which they always did, which I always found quietly reassuring. My console pinged. It was a message sent through a routing channel I recognized, an indirect one, careful, the kind of route you use when you want the content to arrive without the trail. The message read, "The review committee meets in 6 weeks. You should know it will pass. The evidence is clear." It was unsigned. I knew who sent it. I sat with that for a minute. The review would pass and the classification would change, and humans across the consortium would carry a different status in the legal and diplomatic frameworks that governed interspecies interaction. It would not fix everything. It would not undo 40 years, but it would open doors that had been built to stay closed, and doors, once open, have a way of staying that way. 3 years of quiet work, 6 weeks of active operation, 4 days of something much closer to the edge than I had planned for, And this, a message about a committee meeting unsigned, sent through a careful route, from a person whose name would appear all over the official record, and who had still taken a moment to make sure I knew. A second message arrived 2 minutes after the first, same route. It said, also, the coffee on this vessel is extraordinary. I owe you a debt. I read it twice. I wrote back, debts imply a transaction. That's not how this works. The reply came fast, faster than the distance between us should have allowed, which told me she had already been composing it when she sent the first two. Then call it gratitude. I thought about that for a moment. Gratitude was honest. Gratitude was not a transaction. Gratitude was a person acknowledging that something was done and that it mattered. I wrote, gratitude is acceptable. Then I put the comm unit down and pulled up my next route. Sector 8, a cargo run to a colony station that needed medical supplies and replacement parts for a water processing unit. I had taken the job 3 days ago because the pay was low and nobody else had bid on it, and the colony needed the supplies before winter. I set the course. The Better Days responded exactly as she always did, steady and reliable and slightly cold. There is something I have learned, over years of quiet work, that I never said to Salith and never put in any report, and never shared with anyone who wasn't already doing it themselves. The reason the invisible work matters, the real reason, has nothing to do with outcomes. Outcomes are the evidence. The reason itself is simpler. It is the fact that the universe tends toward entropy. Things fall apart. Systems degrade. Good things stop existing if nothing acts to sustain them. Something has to push back against that. Something has to hold the line. We are very good at holding lines, humans. We are patient and organized, and we care about things for a long time, longer than any external system has ever fully accounted for, and we do not require acknowledgement to keep going. I did not start watching over Salith because I expected anything from it. I started because I was there and I could, and because she was trying to do something real, and real things deserve to continue. She is still trying. The summit succeeded. The Eastern expansion talks are ongoing. The review committee will meet in 6 weeks and the evidence is clear. I will be in Sector 8 when the vote happens. I will read the result in the same background news feed I always run, and I will file it in the encrypted folder, and I will keep moving. That is the whole truth of it, and I find, examining it from every angle, that I am not sorry about any of it. Not the cold nights or the low-pay jobs or the 3 years of working in the dark. Not the cost of it, which was real, or the invisibility of it, which was deliberate. Not the one moment in a service corridor when the calculation went close enough to the edge that I felt it. I am not sorry because the thing I was protecting is still there, still moving, still trying. A single thought, 2 years and 4 months ago. Someone should make sure she lives long enough to do the thing she is trying to do. And then the next 1,000 days of deciding, again and again, quietly and without announcement, yes, still, today as well, and tomorrow. That is what I am. That is what we are, most of us, in one way or another, when nobody is watching and the work is hard, and there is no particular reason to keep going except the plain and stubborn fact that we decided to. The Better Days cleared the dock. I set course for Sector 8. The stars held their positions ahead of me, patient and permanent, and entirely indifferent to whether I was there or not. I was there. I always would be.